Welcome to the Essential Dynamics podcast. I'm your host, Derek Hudson. Essential Dynamics is a framework that I've been developing that helps us think through tricky situations. And in the podcast, we test the concepts of essential dynamics through deep conversations with interesting people. In season 3, we're focusing on helping leaders of organizations get clear on their challenges and their opportunities to help them with their organization's quest. And today, I'm really excited to welcome Domenico Lapore to the podcast. Domenico is a systems thinker. He's an author. He's an advisor to clients all over the world. And he's written several books and developed management methodologies to support his clients in his work. There's a lot that he can share with us today. So Domenico, first of all, welcome and thanks for joining.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you for reaching out.
What else should our listeners know about you before we start our conversation?
Well, as this podcast is probably be listened to by many Canadians, let me say that since 2018, I'm also a proud Canadian. I was born and I grew up in Italy. I developed myself professionally there. But then about 20 years ago, I started to travel for work extensively to North America. And since 2010, I've lived in Canada. And since 2018, I'm a new Canadian. So I'm happy to say to our listener that I'm a proud Canadian, even if from the accent you might not detect it, but, I'm Canadian.
Well, that's one of the things about being Canadian is that there are many accents, and some people have been here for thousands of years, and some people have been here, or their people have been here for a few weeks. One of the things we say in Edmonton is 5 minutes and you're one of us. So love having you here. So Domenico, I've read some of your material. We've had some conversations. I really like the way you think. And one of the things that I would really like to talk about today is how organizations get stuck and then how to help them get unstuck. Because, I think sometimes there's a natural growth that happens, but then things change and organizations, if they keep doing the same things, they're going to get the same results. They're not happy with that, but they don't know how to move on. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
Oh my!
Yeah. And we only have 25 minutes.
We only have 25 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Let me say something as you throw this curveball. Let me try and hit it. People build their own prison, their own cognitive prison out of language. So what prevents us from seeing avenues and perceive a broader set of cause and effect relationship that might help in seeing avenues? It's severely limited by the way we speak. And the way we speak is obviously the consequence of the way we think and the way we look at reality and derive through cause and effect reasoning and understanding of our world. Language is a trap. It's extremely powerful, but it can be extremely dangerous. So I would say that after almost 30 years of work, I come to the conclusion that the first and foremost reason for people getting stuck is because they get trapped in linguistic and cognitive loops that they cannot escape from. However, another important aspect of it is sheer ignorance. Management schools and universities in general have done a very, very poor job in educating managers and leaders to the fundamentals of what it means to be competitive. And cost accounting is single-handedly responsible for a huge chunk of the mistakes the company make and prevent the growth. Clearly, the whole financial system is geared to listen to Wall Street instead of Main Street. And so over the decades, especially in the last 30 years, there has been a huge divide between what is realistically possible and what instead banks, financial institutions, accounting methods allow us to see. So it's a good combination of wrong conversations and sheer ignorance, both of which can be addressed.
Wow, there's so much there. So I want to go back. I don't want to miss anything, but I want to go back to, you said cognitive prisons, and then you also said trap.
Linguistic traps, yes.
Linguistic traps. And I think what I'm picking up there is when we say a word, we think we know what it means. Mm-hmm. But often our usage is narrower than the word could possibly mean.
Right.
And so then we say the words and we think that's the way to express the thought. Mm-hmm. But to use my language, we've actually constrained ourselves and we're thinking far more narrowly than we need to.
Right. Yes. That's exactly right. And when you start stringing together words in sentences, and so you create reality through this language, the way you construct and the way you and the way you build these speech acts creates the cognitive environment that becomes, if not challenged, the prison. So, in other words, it's not just the grammatical, syntactical structure, but it's also the semantics that goes with words that, when strung together, create images and create cause and effect relationships which do not hold true. And if we are at the helm of an organization, and this organization is built hierarchically, where people are reluctant in a sort of command and control vertical way, and people are reluctant to challenge images, mental models created by this language, then the neural pathway in the brain becomes more and more entrenched and become more and more difficult to challenge.
See, you mentioned cause and effect.
Right.
And if I was to describe what I think I've learned about your work, it's that you believe that we should understand the reality of the cause and effect in a system. And your thesis might be that because of language and ignorance, sometimes we assume that if you do a thing, you will get an effect when there's no basis for that.
Right. Cause and effect, was originated as a study, philosophically 2,500 years ago in Greece, and in more modern times by science, that has brought to life in a spectacular way cause and effect reasoning. But cause and effect is not a linear thing. The network of cause and effect relationship creates a field of forces. And this field of forces is what determines the way we perceive reality, what we perceive, what we think is reality. So learning how to think cause and effect is exactly the opposite of falling prey of the natural tendency that humans have to see linearity where linearity doesn't exist. So we are witnessing today, just to give a very, very simple example, the government of Canada, the Central Bank of Canada is begging entrepreneurs not to build expectations of inflations into the salaries. So in other words, we are experiencing inflation today, and the natural reaction is let's raise salaries because inflation comes, so salaries has to be raised. If we keep going on to this spiral, we will create a mental model, an image of the fact that we will expecting inflation to raise. And if we do that, we will trigger a series of negative cause and effect relationship that will make very difficult to rein in this modest amount of inflation that we're experiencing today. So this is a simple example, but in real life, in the life of every day, we are entirely surrounded by these mental models.
So we're in complex systems where you can't isolate the variable and say, if I push this button, this will happen. Mm-hmm. And then we also have these feedback loops
Mm-hmm.
so that the effect then creates the cause again.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you get a spiral, either positive or negative.
Mm-hmm.
Your position then is you can't think linearly, so you have to think a different way.
Yeah, that's right.
And how would you describe how people need to learn to think?
Yeah. In previous conversations that we had, Derek, you know that I had the great fortune to meet early in my life the work of Dr. Goldratt, who is the originator of the theory of constraints, a body of knowledge that he began to develop first from a mathematical standpoint, and then more of a methodological one from late 70s, early 80s. The enormous success that he had in the 80s with books like The Goal or The Race, The Haystack Syndrome, what is this thing called theory of constraints, essays on theory of constraints. The great success that he had with these books and implementation at the time, mainly in industrial environment, solidified in him the fact that the issue was not the rational understanding of why production should be run in a certain way, why logistics should be arranged in a certain way, but the fact that it was not the rational aspect of managing something as mundane as operation was not tackled at the most fundamental level that human beings operate under, which is a cognitive level, at a subliminal level. So he decided to reformulate entirely his body of knowledge called theory of constraints through a different language, using an approach that he called thinking processes that support the our ability to articulate our reasoning. Okay. And there has been since 93, 94, when the first book came out called It's Not Luck, there has been a gigantic amount of confusion on what these thinking processes are. In a lot of literature, non-written by Goldratt, these are labeled as logical tools. And as logical tools can be used in contexts where logic has to prevail. Unfortunately, for the majority of people that have been following that path, the thinking processes of TOC are just a gigantic, monumental linguistic framework to allow people to garner the strength of their emotion and channel them in a way that can be used. They are the vessel that allow our emotion to generate results. This is because it was evident to Goldratt that it wasn't the constraint, so to speak, was not rational thinking, because anybody can understand that in order to accelerate the flow, you have to squeeze the tube. Yeah. But the problem was how deeply entrenched certain models of managing are, and so how deep the changes that need to take place have to go. And in order to do that, he shied away from psychoanalytical traps, and he embraced a very solid epistemological linguistic framework that enables everybody who's willing to tap into the ability to intuit, to generate intuition, in the ability to create a full analysis of what the intuition provides, and with an ability to string together an action plan that can affect the change. So while the thinking processes might look on the surface something logical in the mathematical sense, in reality, they serve the purpose of allowing the biggest strength that we humans have, which are emotions, to be channeled in a way that can be useful.
So if I recall, Goldratt said, well, we're going to start with emotion because if you don't care about something, you're not going to put the effort in to make it better. And once we have emotion about something, once we care about something, the next step is actually intuition.
That's right. Emotion can be a powerful trigger for intuition. Absolutely. Yes, it can be. Yes.
But then he goes beyond that. And this is good for me because I tend to be more intuitive. But then there's the rigor of applying the logic to the intuition and saying, well, if you think this is how you're going to solve this problem, let's look at the cause and effect and see if we can actually make it happen that way.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. And in fact, for very simple, straightforward application, what he called the proven solution, you don't even need to tap that deep into your emotions, because if you want to manage a production flow, or if you want to accelerate a new product development, or if you want to organize a better supply chain, there are ready-made algorithms that you can use. But if you really want to break through and you want to sustain your growth, you need to be able to generate almost on a daily basis mini breakthroughs that enable you to overcome hurdles that, if not addressed, become the prison that I was telling you before. And in order to do that, you need to embrace a way of thinking where you can connect all your emotions in a way, linguistically, in a way that paves the way for you to generate a breakthrough solution, which frankly is something that can be done on a regular basis. I mean, this has been not just my experience, I believed in that, but it has been my experience over the last 30 years, almost 30 years. So you can, whatever the context is, you can take a cognitive snapshot of what keeps people blocked and surface very quickly the mental models that keep the person or the company or whatever situation in the situation of blockage. All you need is people who are open-minded to discuss their issues. And normally that happens when the pain is too strong. So very few successful company accept the idea of challenging what they do. But the vast majority of the companies are not successful, and they're not successful because they hit roadblocks that they don't know how to overcome. And even the successful companies, they're not going to be very successful if they don't do a sort of maintenance to the way they think. Because obsolescence, as Dr. Deming used to say, doesn't require any maintenance.
That's right. That's right. If you're successful today, the world will change, and you'll become irrelevant if you don't adapt. And so adapting requires getting stuck and then creating a new mental model.
Yeah.
So you write about this and you speak about it. You also advise clients directly. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And so how do you help leaders become unstuck? I presume it's through some kind of conversation like this, but how does it work for you?
You said it right. I mean, we, as a small consulting firm, we have produced a number of publications internationally that is, unheard of for companies as small as we are. And the reason why we did that, it's because at the very core, we are scientists, but also because we enjoyed tremendously the feedback that would come from trying to try to convey ideas that people would struggle to cope with. So over the years, instead of focusing on the technicalities of theory of constraints or the technicalities of implementing a system of statistical process control, which are incredibly interesting, but confined to the realm of how to make things work, we focused on teaching people to think on how they think. And that was that led us to develop a wealth of knowledge on how the thinking processes of TOC can be used in a myriad of circumstances. You were mentioning the work that we do with enterprises. I would say that 80% of the work that I've done over the last 30 years has been with companies of smaller dimension, from 20 to 200, just to shoot a number.
Sure.
And so we've only dealt, and we have exclusively dealt with decision makers, the owner manager, the managing director, the CEO, whatever you want to call it, and the core nucleus of decision makers. This has enabled us to understand more the thinking pattern of people that are at the helm of an organization and they need to take decisions. So we were able to dissect very clearly very precise mental trajectories and identify very quickly the elements of ignorance, quote unquote, that needed to be filled. And we came up with a template, which we have published repeatedly, and we talk about almost on a daily basis on our blogs, a pattern that any organization can follow. And the pattern, just to answer, to be a little bit pragmatic about your question, it's always the same. First, identify what the jargon of TOC calls the core conflict of an organization, surface the prevailing mental models that keep us stuck, and then develop conceptual solutions which later can become operational plans via project. And as a result of this work, day in, day out, we also came up with something that we're very proud of, a generic solution for organizational design that can help any organization to scale up as quickly as they can without incurring into the predicaments of a conventional hierarchy.
Wow, Domenico, there's a lot there. So that organizational model is based on projects.
Right.
Is that right?
Exactly.
And network of projects. Yes. And I've had a lot of experience in organizations that know they operate as projects. Like I worked for a big consulting firm. I worked for an engineering firm. But I've also seen that most organizations really function with a series of projects, but they don't manage projects or manage the network of projects.
Right. So,
and they draw org charts and expect that somehow that's going to make the difference.
Right.
But the work happens across the org chart, right, because that's the way it goes. If I could maybe ask for a specific example, or maybe a composite example. You've got a leader that's stuck. You start working with them. Mm-hmm. You identify the core conflict, mm-hmm, examine the assumptions, and then all of a sudden it's a new world. Right. Do you have an example of that, or one that you could share?
How many do you need? I mean, we basically all our work has been based on that. Actually, we have derived a completely generic solution. When Mr. Cohen and Odette Cohen has been the longest serving member of the Goldratt schools and the Goldratt Institute since the late 70s. He was actually the first person in 79 that Dr. Goldratt hired in his newly formed company. So
that's fantastic.
Cohen been my older brother, my mentor, my friend, my personal rabbi. And I owe him almost everything that I am professionally. With Odette, we developed in mid-90s, and we published it in late 90s after 4 years of collaborative work, a book called The Decalogue. The Decalogue is, as the word implies, 10 systemic steps to build sustainability into an organization. And obviously, like everybody else, we started with a solution without building the problem to which our Decalogue was the solution, right, of. That came later. And so what we do is once the core conflict has been identified and the core assumptions have been raised, we show how whatever is the set of injections, it looks like magic, but it's reality. Whatever is the set of assumptions that they have, there are five fundamental injections, five fundamental solutions to make these mental models go away. Obviously, it's not straightforward. It's not simple. It requires a pattern of change that lasts several months, in some cases a year, and in some cases even 2 years. But it's the only way to sustain the transition from the present situation of being stuck into a situation of unstuck.
Unstuck, sure.
Unstuck. And these fundamental solution, these fundamental, the lingo, again, I apologize, there are a couple of words in TOC you just can't avoid. The fundamental solutions to any situation of organizational blockage, they revolve around understanding variation in the system, understand how to synchronize a process flow or many processes flow on a physical constraint. They have to do with creating a cycle of continuous improvement, what Deming called PDCA, creating a channel, an open channel of communication all through the value network, and how to present what Dr. Golder called unrefusable offer, i.e. penetrate the market in ways that conventionally is not possible through something called external constraint. So it's they very these solutions are not necessarily all these solutions need to be applied to any organization, but more often than not, 2 or 3 of them, they are critical to get a company unstuck and to make them see reality in a different way. In recent years, I'll be totally transparent with you, especially in the world that we live today, which is more like a pull economy rather than a push economy as it was in the 80s. We almost invariably we start with external constraints. So in other words, we create for organization the ability very quickly to break through into the market and raise sales drastically, and everything then comes after, how to organize to scale up the sales.
So Domenico, I'm fascinated by this, but we're fast running out of time, as I knew we would. So let me suggest that our topic for next time, because we will be back, if we could start with an example of a core conflict, because that ties into things that I've talked about on this cast, and then we can move into some of those, particularly the challenging of assumptions,
right,
and walk through this a little bit more, because I think if people have a little bit of that context, they go to your material, they can see more, and then they can reach out to you or us or to me, and we can have further conversations. But I think if we visit again next time, starting with the core conflict, we might be able to put something that people can manage together. So if you'll come, will you come back? Would that be
absolutely
okay?
With great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Well, how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way to look you up?
We have a huge website that we cultivate, with great love and passion. And so it's intelligent. It's the website is intelligent management, one word, .ws. Don't ask me why WS, which is Western Samoa, is because 15 years ago when we .com wasn't available for intelligent management, so we went for something very trendy.
I thought it meant website.
No, it's called WS.
WS.
And
okay.
And if people are more interested in a solution based on projects, we have another website called essential.com, where essential is with the second E is a 3.
Is a 3. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was wondering how you're going to do that.
And actually, that is that is there is a long but very readable write-up of how we got to the solution with the wealth of material that people can enjoy reading.
Well, I can concur that there's a lot of material on your website. I've been through some of it. I'll just close by saying that the Essential Dynamics podcast is brought to you by Unconstrained, my consultancy, and you can learn more at getunconstrained.com. I'd encourage everyone to share the podcast, to like it and subscribe. And we'll be back again in a couple of weeks, I think. So Domenico Lapore, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Bryn Griffiths, thanks for your work behind the scenes. I'm Derek Hudson. Until next time, consider your quest.